it's the quad at 12. Tap, 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 your ribs keep count. A grin in the dark pulls closer, cold grin. Sharp heel, hard ground. String scraped thin, your breath cut short. You run in your head, your feet stay stuck. Midnight opens, pulls you in. Your pulse says go. Walls lean in, the air tastes metal. A name you won't say crawls near you. Clutch your chest to stop the shake. A laugh you can't play, skims past your ear. You swear the floor is trembling. You hear the bow sing thin. The night draws in. Tap, 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 keep breathing. Tap, 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 keep leaning. That's the lift, thrill in the din. Tap, 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 we keep the beat. Tap, 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 you feel the pull. Tap, 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 you take control. Fear meets heat, we ride the roll. Oh, tap, 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 we keep the beat. Death at midnight plays a gig tap, tap, tap. On his violin. Tap, tap, tap. You yank at the door, the latch won't click. Hands on the wood, palms sweat slick. Hallway narrows, lights go thin. Your steps trip fast, alarms within. You count to 10, you count resets. You bite your lip, your jaw sets. The floorboards tick, a bow is drawn. Tap, 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 the night plays on. They whisper she wore velvet on. Some old title stitched in gold. He hauled timber, cracked his knuckles. Now both sway bold in the cold. Veil slips low, a gas goes bright. He pulls her close, she says alright. Moss chills back, breath fogs wide. The rhythm won't quit. Tap, 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 keep breathing. Tap, 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 keep leaning. Dance to lift, thrill in the din. Tap, 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 we keep the beat. Tap, 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 you feel the pull. Tap, 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 you take control. Fear meets heat, we ride the roll. Oh, tap, 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 we keep the beat. The vault yawns and multitudes arise. Bones ring time and kingdoms equalize. Felt effortless, saw spitting ranks of 10. Court and alley join round without end. The baron is heels, the cartwright is crowned. By sable decree, all feet are bound. Beasts of the deep with lantern eyes convene. Fate reads cold, the script unseen. What a saraband. King and peasant dancing together. Tap, 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 tap.